My mom took my college fund for my brother. A year later I bought the house she dreamed of. I still remember the exact moment my world collapsed. It was a humid Tuesday morning in August 2022, 3 weeks before my senior year of high school was supposed to begin. The air conditioning in our small ranch house in suburban Phoenix had been struggling against the Arizona heat, and I was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing college applications when my mother walked in with that expression I'd learned to dread, the one that meant she was about to deliver news that would change everything. My college fund sat in a savings account that had grown slowly but steadily over 4 years. Every dollar represented sacrifice. Birthday money I hadn't spent, wages from my part-time job at the local grocery store, tips from babysitting neighborhood kids, even the $20 bills my grandmother slipped me during holiday visits. I'd been religious about saving, depositing every spare cent because I knew that college was my only escape route from the cycle of financial struggle that had defined my family for generations. The account had reached $18,000. Not enough for 4 years at a prestigious university, but sufficient to cover community college and the first 2 years at a state school if I continued working. I'd calculated and recalculated the numbers dozens of times, creating spreadsheets that showed exactly how I could make it work. I was going to be the first person in my family to graduate from college, and that savings account was my ticket to a different life. Mom sat down across from me at the scarred wooden table we'd had since I was a child, avoiding my eyes as she spoke. My brother Kevin, 2 years older and infinitely more charming, had gotten himself into trouble again. This time it wasn't just a minor scrape or a fine his natural charisma could talk his way out of. He'd been arrested for drunk driving, his second offense, and faced serious jail time unless he could pay for a top-tier lawyer and enter an expensive rehabilitation program. The costs were staggering: $15,000 for legal representation, another $8,000 for the 6-month residential treatment program that might convince a judge to consider probation instead of prison time. Kevin had always been Mom's favorite, the golden child who could do no wrong even when he was clearly doing everything wrong. Where I was quiet and studious, he was outgoing and magnetic. Where I followed rules and earned good grades, he charmed his way through life, leaving a trail of consequences for others to clean up. Mom explained the situation with the kind of careful reasoning she used when she already knew her conclusion was indefensible. Kevin needed help, she said. Family had to stick together. The money in my college fund was just sitting there, not being used for anything immediate, while Kevin's situation was an emergency that required immediate action. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was existential. That money represented 4 years of saying no to things my friends took for granted. While they bought new clothes, went to movies, or grabbed pizza after school, I'd been working extra shifts and declining invitations because every dollar mattered. I'd worn the same winter coat for 3 years because replacing it would have meant $20 fewer in my college fund. I'd packed lunches every single day because the $5 for cafeteria food could go toward my future instead. I tried to argue, to explain that taking my college fund would destroy years of planning and sacrifice. I pointed out that Kevin had created his own problems and that enabling his behavior wouldn't actually help him in the long run. I reminded Mom that I'd been accepted to Arizona State with partial academic scholarships that would be meaningless without the savings to cover room, board, and the remaining tuition. But Kevin was her baby, her charming son who'd somehow convinced her that his mistakes were just bad luck rather than the predictable consequences of irresponsible choices. She'd already made up her mind before she'd even told me about the situation. The transfer had been completed that morning while I was still asleep. My 4 years of sacrifice moved with a few clicks on her phone to cover the costs of Kevin's latest disaster. I felt something die inside me as she explained that I could always attend community college and live at home, maybe transfer to a university later when the family's finances improved. She promised to help me rebuild the fund, though we both knew that was an empty gesture. Our family had never had extra money, and there was no reason to believe that would change now. The worst part wasn't the money itself, though losing $18,000 felt like a physical blow. The worst part was what it represented: final, undeniable proof that I would always be secondary in my mother's priorities. Kevin's immediate needs would always trump my long-term goals. His happiness would always matter more than my dreams. That night, lying in my bedroom that I'd outgrown years ago, I made a decision that would define the next phase of my life. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I wasn't going to accept the role of the responsible child who sacrificed her dreams so the golden child could avoid consequences. I was going to find another way, and I was going to succeed not just despite this betrayal but because of it. I spent the next week researching every possible option for funding my education. I applied for dozens of scholarships, no matter how small or specific. I researched student loans, work-study programs, and schools that offered tuition payment plans. I even looked into programs that would pay for college in exchange for military or public service commitments after graduation. The path forward was going to be harder than anything I'd originally planned, but it was still a path, I could take out loans to cover what my scholarships didn't, work more hours to minimize debt, and graduate with a degree even if it meant years of financial struggle afterward. More importantly, I made a promise to myself that night. I would remember this feeling, this betrayal, this moment when I learned that the only person I could truly count on was myself. And someday when I had the power to choose, I would choose differently than my mother had chosen. The months that followed were the hardest of my life but also the most defining. I threw myself into work with an intensity that surprised even me, taking on every available shift at the grocery store and adding weekend babysitting jobs that kept me busy from dawn until well past dark. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford and my social life became non-existent, but every paycheck brought me closer to independence. My senior year of high school was a blur of early morning shifts, afternoon classes and late-night study sessions. While my classmates worried about prom dates and graduation parties, I was calculating loan interest rates and researching the cheapest possible living arrangements near Arizona State. The scholarship I'd earned covered about 60% of tuition, but I still needed to find a way to pay for housing, meals, books, and living expenses. I found a tiny studio apartment 20 minutes from campus that rented for $800 a month. More than I wanted to spend, but the cheapest option that wasn't a shared room in a house full of strangers. The place was barely larger than my bedroom at home, with a kitchenette that consisted of a mini fridge, microwave, and hot plate. The carpet was stained, the bathroom fixtures were ancient, and the air conditioning unit sounded like it was trying to achieve flight every time it kicked on. But it was mine and that made all the difference. Moving out of my childhood home was both liberating and terrifying. My father, who'd remained largely silent during the college fund crisis, helped me load my few belongings into his pickup truck without saying much about the situation. I think he understood that Mom had made a choice that couldn't be undone, and that I was making my own choice in response. Mom's reaction was more complicated. She seemed hurt that I was leaving, as if my moving out was somehow a rejection of her rather than a necessary step toward the education she'd helped make financially impossible. She kept suggesting that I could save money by living at home and commuting to campus, not understanding that I needed distance from the family dynamics that had led to the situation in the first place. Kevin, meanwhile, had successfully completed his court-mandated rehabilitation program and was back to his old self, seemingly unburdened by any awareness of what his legal troubles had cost me. He'd found a job at a local car dealership and was talking about getting his own apartment, funded by the sales commissions that came easily to someone with his natural charm and ability to connect with people. College life was nothing like what I'd imagined during those years of saving and planning. Instead of the traditional freshman experience of dorm life and campus activities, I was working 30 hours a week while carrying a full course load. My typical day started at 5 a.m. with a shift at a campus coffee shop, followed by classes until mid-afternoon, then more work at a tutoring center that helped struggling students with math and science. The exhaustion was constant and crushing. There were nights when I fell asleep over my textbooks, still wearing my work uniform because I was too tired to change clothes. There were days when I survived on vending machine snacks because I didn't have time to prepare real meals. My grades were good. I was too driven to let them slip. But I felt like I was constantly running just to stay in place. But something unexpected happened during those grinding months. I discovered I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Every challenge I overcame, every obstacle I navigated, every small victory I achieved through pure determination built my confidence in ways that an easier path never could have. I was learning that I could count on myself completely, that I could find solutions when there seemed to be none. The tutoring job led to my first real breakthrough. I'd always been good at math and science, but explaining concepts to struggling students taught me that I had a gift for making complex ideas accessible. Word spread among students and I started getting requests for private tutoring sessions that paid significantly more than my other jobs. Within 6 months, I was earning enough from tutoring to quit the coffee shop job and focus on higher-paying clients. I specialized in helping students who were failing calculus and chemistry, subjects that intimidated many people but felt intuitive to me. My reputation grew and I began charging premium rates for test preparation and intensive study sessions before major exams. By the end of my freshman year, I was earning more per hour than many adults with full-time jobs. More importantly, I was building a skill set and client base that would serve me throughout college and beyond. I'd found a way to turn my academic strengths into a sustainable business model. The financial pressure began to ease slightly, but the emotional distance between my family and me continued to grow. I visited home occasionally for holidays or family gatherings, but I felt like an outsider looking in on people whose priorities I no longer understood or shared. Kevin was thriving in his sales job, already talking about buying a new car and planning vacations. Mom seemed proud of his success, frequently mentioning his achievements during our brief conversations. My own success went largely unnoticed or uncommented upon. When I mentioned that I'd made Dean's List or that my tutoring business was expanding, the responses were polite but minimal. It was as if my achievements existed in a separate universe from the family's definition of success and worth. During spring break of my sophomore year, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to expand my tutoring business beyond just helping individual students. I'd noticed that many students struggled with the same concepts, and that group tutoring sessions could be more efficient and profitable than one-on-one meetings. I started offering weekend boot camps for students preparing for standardized tests like the SAT, ACT, and GRE. The sessions were intensive, focused, and produced measurable results. Students who attended my boot camps consistently improved their scores by 100 to 200 points, and word of mouth brought me more clients than I could handle. That summer, instead of working multiple part-time jobs, I ran my tutoring business full-time. I rented space in a strip mall near campus, created structured curriculum for different types of test preparation, and hired 2 other students to help handle the demand. What had started as a survival strategy was becoming a legitimate business. The income was substantial, more than I'd ever imagined possible as a college student. For the first time since starting college, I had financial breathing room. I could afford better housing, healthier food, and even some small luxuries that had been impossible during those first grinding months. But more than the money, I was building something that was entirely mine. Every student I helped, every score improvement I facilitated, every small success story added to my growing confidence that I could create value in the world through my own efforts and abilities. As I prepared for my junior year, I began to dream bigger than just surviving college and finding a decent job after graduation. I was starting to envision a future where I could build something significant, where the betrayal that had forced me onto this harder path might ultimately lead to opportunities one never would have discovered otherwise. By my junior year, what had started as a desperate attempt to pay for college had evolved into something I'd never anticipated, a thriving educational services company that was generating more revenue than most small businesses. The tutoring center I'd established near campus had expanded to include 6 full-time tutors, and we were serving over 300 students per semester across various subjects and test preparation programs. The success was intoxicating, but it also brought new challenges I hadn't expected. Managing employees, handling business taxes, dealing with commercial leases, and maintaining quality control across multiple services required skills I was learning on the fly. I was still a full-time student, but increasingly, my real education was happening in the business world rather than the classroom. The financial transformation was dramatic. I'd gone from counting every dollar and living on ramen noodles to having a business account with a healthy 6-figure balance. I moved from that tiny studio apartment to a spacious 2-bedroom place in a modern complex, not because I needed the extra space but because I could finally afford to live somewhere that didn't depress me every time I walked through the door. But success brought an unexpected side effect: isolation from my peers. While other students worried about finding internships or part-time jobs, I was running board meetings and negotiating contracts with local high schools that wanted to bring our test prep programs to their students. The concerns that occupied my daily life, employee retention, market expansion, competitive analysis, were foreign to most people my age. I found myself spending more time with my business mentor, Dr. Sarah Chin, a marketing professor who'd agreed to advise my company in exchange for real-world case study material for her classes. She was the first person who truly understood what I was building and why it mattered beyond just the financial success. Dr. Chin helped me see that my business was solving a genuine problem in the education system. Standardized test scores increasingly determined college admission and scholarship opportunities, but quality test preparation was often expensive and inaccessible to students from lower-income families. By creating efficient group programs and training excellent tutors, we were democratizing access to the kind of preparation that could change students' futures. During the summer between my junior and senior years, I made the decision to expand beyond our local market. I researched cities across Arizona and identified 3 markets with large student populations and limited competition: Tucson, Flagstaff, and Sedona. Each location would require significant upfront investment in space, equipment, and staff, but the potential return was enormous. The expansion was more complex than I'd anticipated. Each city had different demographics, different competitive landscapes, and different relationships with local schools and colleges. I spent weeks in each location analyzing market conditions, interviewing potential employees, and building relationships with educational institutions that could become referral sources. The Tucson location launched first in a renovated office space near the University of Arizona campus. I hired Maria Rodriguez, a recent graduate with teaching experience, to manage the daily operations while I focused on marketing and business development. The launch exceeded our projections with over 100 students enrolling in our programs within the first month. Flagstaff and Sedona followed within 6 months, each with their own unique challenges and opportunities. Flagstaff served primarily Northern Arizona University students and local high schoolers, while Sedona attracted a different demographic, affluent families seeking premium educational services for their college-bound children. By the beginning of my senior year, I was operating 4 locations across Arizona, employing 22 people, and generating over $1 million in annual revenue. The business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined when I first started tutoring struggling calculus students to pay my rent. But the most satisfying part wasn't the financial success. It was the impact we were having on students' lives. Our files were full of thank you letters from students who'd raised their SAT scores by 300 points, earned scholarships they wouldn't have qualified for otherwise, or gained admission to dream schools that had seemed impossible before our intervention. One letter particularly stayed with me from a first-generation college student named David whose family had immigrated from Mexico when he was 12. His parents worked multiple jobs but couldn't afford traditional test prep programs. Our sliding scale fee structure had made it possible for him to attend our boot camps, and his improved scores had earned him a full scholarship to Arizona State's engineering program. Reading his letter, I realized that my mother's betrayal had led me to create something that was helping other students avoid the kind of financial barriers I'd faced. There was a certain poetic justice in that. Her choice to prioritize Kevin's immediate needs over my educational goals had ultimately enabled me to help hundreds of other students achieve their educational dreams. During my final semester, while most of my classmates were applying for entry-level jobs and worrying about post-graduation plans, I was preparing for a different kind of transition. The business was stable enough to run without my daily oversight, which meant I could finally step back and think strategically about the future. Dr. Chen suggested that I consider franchising the business model, allowing entrepreneurs in other states to replicate our systems and strategies under our brand. The idea was intriguing. It would allow rapid expansion without requiring enormous capital investment from me personally. I spent months developing franchise documentation, creating training programs, and establishing quality control systems that would ensure consistent service across multiple locations. The legal and administrative work was complex, but I'd learned to see challenges as opportunities to develop new skills rather than obstacles to avoid. The first franchise inquiry came from Denver, Colorado, where a former teacher named Michael Thompson wanted to start an educational services business but needed a proven system and support structure. After extensive vetting and training, he became our first franchisee, opening a location that served the Denver metro area. Success bred more success. Within 6 months, I had franchise applications from business owners in Texas, California, Nevada, and New Mexico. Each new location required careful evaluation and extensive training, but it also represented validation that we'd created something genuinely valuable and replicable. By graduation day in May 2026, I was overseeing a network of 12 locations across 6 states, with more in development. The company I'd started as a survival mechanism was generating over $3 million in annual revenue and had helped thousands of students improve their test scores and educational opportunities. Standing in my cap and gown at the Arizona State graduation ceremony, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in what I'd accomplished certainly, but also a kind of vindicated satisfaction that came from proving wrong everyone who'd assumed my future would be limited by my family's financial constraints. My parents attended the graduation along with Kevin and his girlfriend. They seemed proud but also somewhat bewildered by the scale of what I'd built. Mom kept asking questions about the business that revealed she didn't really understand what I did or how I'd become successful enough to employ dozens of people. After the ceremony, as we stood in the Arizona heat taking family photos, Mom mentioned something that would plant the seed for my next major decision. She'd been driving past a house in Paradise Valley, one of Phoenix's most exclusive neighborhoods, and had fallen in love with it. The house was everything she'd ever dreamed of, a sprawling ranch-style home with mountain views, a resort-style backyard, and the kind of luxury finishes she'd admired in magazines but never thought she'd own. The asking price was $1.2 million, completely out of reach for my parents' modest income and non-existent savings. But as she described the house with the same wistful longing I remembered from my childhood, when she'd point out beautiful homes during our drives through wealthy neighborhoods, I realized something that would change everything. It wasn't out of reach for me. The house at 4847 North Paradise Valley Drive sat on 2 acres of pristine desert landscape, with unobstructed views of Camelback Mountain and the kind of architectural details that appeared in luxury home magazines. I'd driven past it 3 times in the weeks following graduation, each visit confirming what I'd known from my mother's wistful description. This wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of everything she'd always wanted but never believed she could have. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now had the financial means to purchase the very house my mother could only dream about, using money I'd earned because she'd forced me onto a path of complete self-reliance. The business empire I'd built from nothing was generating enough profit to make the $1.2 million purchase not just possible but comfortable. I spent 2 weeks researching every aspect of the property before making my decision. Built in 2019, the house featured 6 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with commercial-grade appliances, and outdoor spaces that looked like they belonged at a 5-star resort. The master suite alone was larger than the apartment I'd lived in during my first year of college. But the decision to buy it wasn't about the house itself. It was about what the purchase would represent. For 21 years I'd lived in a family where my needs came second, where my sacrifices were expected and my achievements were minimized. Kevin's problems had always taken precedence over my dreams, and my mother's love had always felt conditional on my willingness to accept that secondary role. Now I had the power to flip that dynamic completely. The purchase process was surprisingly straightforward when you had the financial backing I'd accumulated. My business accountant helped structure the purchase to minimize tax implications, and my attorney handled the contract negotiations with the kind of efficiency that comes from dealing with serious money rather than complicated financing scenarios. I closed on the house on a Thursday afternoon in June, exactly 11 months after my mother had told me about discovering it during one of her drives through Paradise Valley. The timing wasn't coincidental. I'd been planning this moment for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity to reveal what I'd accomplished. The weekend after closing, I invited my family over for dinner, telling them I wanted to share some news about my post-graduation plans. They assumed I was going to announce a job offer or maybe plans to expand my tutoring business to new cities. None of them imagined that I was about to reveal I'd purchased the house my mother had described as her impossible dream. I picked them up in the new Tesla Model S I'd bought to celebrate graduation, another symbol of success that hadn't gone unnoticed. Kevin had made several comments about the car during the drive, half-joking questions about how a recent college graduate could afford such an expensive vehicle. I'd been vague about my business's financial performance, letting them maintain their assumptions about what a tutoring company could realistically generate. When we pulled into the circular driveway of 4847 North Paradise Valley Drive, the silence in the car was absolute. My father was the first to speak, his voice carrying a confusion that would have been comical in different circumstances. "Jake, I think you made a wrong turn. This isn't a restaurant." I parked the Tesla next to the 3-car garage and turned to face my family with a smile that had been building for 11 months. "You're right, Dad. This isn't a restaurant. This is my house." The next few minutes were a blur of disbelief, questions, and slowly dawning realization. Mom kept asking if I was serious, if this was some kind of joke or mistake. Kevin wanted to know how I could possibly afford a house like this. Dad just sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he was seeing. I led them through the front door and into the soaring entryway, watching their faces as they took in the crystal chandelier, the sweeping staircase, and the view of the valley that stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. This was the house my mother had described with such longing, now furnished and decorated exactly as she'd imagined it should be. The tour took over an hour. Every room revealed new evidence of the life I'd built through my own determination and refusal to accept the limitations others had tried to impose on me. The home office where I managed my expanding business network. The guest bedrooms that could accommodate visiting franchise partners. The backyard infinity pool that overlooked the desert landscape my mother had always found so beautiful. Throughout the tour I watched my mother's face carefully. I saw wonder certainly, but also something else. A dawning awareness of what she'd missed, what she'd failed to recognize about her own daughter's capabilities and potential. During dinner on the outdoor terrace, as we watched the sunset paint Camelback Mountain in shades of red and gold, the conversation finally turned to the questions they'd been avoiding all evening. How had I afforded this? How long had I been planning it? How had they so completely misunderstood what I was building? I explained the growth of my business empire with the same methodical thoroughness I'd once applied to saving for college. 12 locations across 6 states with more opening quarterly. Franchise fees and ongoing royalties that generated passive income while I focused on strategic expansion. Corporate partnerships with school districts that wanted to offer test preparation services to their students. The numbers were staggering even to me as I laid them out. Over $5 million in annual revenue, growing at 40% year over year. A business valued at well over $10 million that I'd built from nothing more than my ability to help students understand calculus and chemistry. Kevin was the first to fully grasp the magnitude of what I'd achieved. His sales background gave him a framework for understanding revenue and growth metrics that our parents lacked. He kept shaking his head and muttering about how he'd assumed I was just running a small tutoring service to pay for school. "Jake," he said finally, "I had no idea. I mean, I knew you were doing well, but this. He gestured at the house, the view, the obvious symbols of serious wealth surrounding us. This is incredible. My father's reaction was more complex. He seemed proud but also somewhat guilty, as if he was realizing for the first time how little attention he'd paid to my achievements while celebrating Kevin's much smaller successes. He kept asking technical questions about the business, displaying genuine interest in my work for the first time I could remember. But it was my mother's response that mattered most to me, and it was the most difficult to interpret. She was quieter than usual, asking fewer questions but watching me more intently. I could see her mind working, reassessing everything she thought she'd known about her daughter's capabilities and character. As the evening wound down and I prepared to drive them home, Mom pulled me aside for a private conversation. We stood on the terrace overlooking the valley, the lights of Phoenix spreading out below us like a carpet of stars. "This house," she said quietly, "it's exactly what I pictured when I told you about it. Every detail." "I know," I replied. "I remembered everything you said about it." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried an emotion I'd rarely heard from her. Something between regret and admiration. "I think I made a mistake, Jake. A big one. I could have been cruel in that moment. I could have listed every way she'd underestimated me, every time she'd prioritized Kevin's immediate wants over my long-term needs, every instance when she'd failed to see my potential. But looking at her face in the soft light of the terrace, I realized that my success had already proven everything I needed to prove. "We all make the choices we think are best at the time," I said. "I'm not angry anymore, Mom. I'm grateful." "Grateful?" She looked confused. "If you hadn't taken my college fund, I never would have been forced to build this business. I would have gone to school, gotten a degree, found a job, and lived a perfectly ordinary life. I never would have discovered what I was actually capable of achieving." Today, 3 years later, my educational services company operates in 15 states with over 60 locations. I've expanded into online test preparation, corporate training, and educational consulting services. The business that started as a desperate attempt to pay for college now employs over 300 people and has helped more than 50,000 students improve their academic prospects. But the most important transformation wasn't financial or professional. It was personal. I learned that sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is their doubt, because it forces you to believe in yourself so completely that nothing can shake that foundation. My mother still drives past beautiful houses in Paradise Valley, but now she sometimes stops by mine for coffee and conversation. Kevin has become one of my biggest supporters, often referring potential clients to our business. And my father has started telling people about his daughter who built a multi-million-dollar company before she turned 25. The betrayal that once felt like the end of my dreams became the beginning of achievements I never could have imagined. Sometimes the people who hurt us most give us exactly what we need to become who we're meant to be.